They say a mother should always be present for the most important moments in her child's life. But what happens when it's the child himself who closes the door and says, "You're not welcome"? It seems impossible to believe, doesn't it? Yet that's exactly what happened to me. I was banned from attending my only son's wedding as if I were a burden, an embarrassment, a disposable detail in the story I helped build. What no one expected was that life has a curious way of turning things around. The same woman rejected days earlier ended up being summoned by the judge as a key player in making the ceremony happen. Imagine the irony. The one humiliated in her living room became indispensable in court. This is where the paradox arises. The party would only happen if the excluded mother were respected. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. How the most painful betrayal can turn into liberation. How humiliation can be returned in the form of dignity. And how silent justice can put everyone in their rightful place. I've taught my son about respect, dignity, and politeness so many times at home that I never imagined hearing such cruel words from my own son. When David looked me in the eye and told me I couldn't go to the wedding because it would be a disgrace, I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. It wasn't just a prohibition. It was a betrayal of everything we'd ever built as a family. That sentence carried within it the greatest humiliation I've ever experienced. The curious thing is that often the deepest pain doesn't come from outside, but from within. It's as if you open the door expecting a hug and get a push instead. The emotion doesn't spill out in tears. It stays stuck in your throat, turning into silence. And in my silence, I realized that perhaps revenge wasn't something loud, but could be born from an unexpected act of liberation. Have you ever noticed that when someone tries to belittle you, they're actually hiding their own insecurities? I saw this in David. He wasn't afraid of my simple dress, but of how it would be perceived by others. How often do we see this in the world? People who prefer to spend fortunes to display a life of appearances while forgetting the essence of what truly matters: respect and family. I remember when I started teaching, still young, I wore simple clothes and was ridiculed by some classmates who believed appearance defined value. They laughed, but they didn't know I was saving every penny to buy my own home. Years later, when many still depended on rent, I had already secured my own home. This was my silent revenge. I turned humiliation into victory, and that lesson has never left me. That's why I always say, betrayal and contempt can be turned to our advantage. The key is how we choose to react. Screaming in that moment would have been futile, but observing in silence gave me clarity. And here's a piece of advice. When someone tries to erase your dignity, don't respond in kind. Breathe, analyze, conserve your strength, and use time as an ally. What hurt me most wasn't being left out of the party, but the feeling that my story as a mother was being erased. This is a pain many parents know. They sacrifice for years, and one day, their own children treat them like a burden. It's like planting a tree and then hearing the fruit call you useless. It's a wound that's unforgettable, but it also teaches. And it was precisely in this pain that I found a spark. Because when life tries to crush us, there's almost always a forgotten detail in the past that can turn the tide. I still had something stored away, a memory that carried not only emotion but also power, and that would be decisive for the next steps. Back home, after that painful scene, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the silence only old houses know. My heart was still pounding, but my mind was begging for calm. It was then that my eyes fell on an old wooden chest in the corner of the room, an inheritance from my parents. That chest had always held not only objects, but also pieces of my life, and I decided to open it. As I lifted the lid, the scent of time enveloped me. Yellowed photos, scribbled letters, memories of Davy's childhood. But among it all, I found a sheaf of forgotten documents. They proved something even I couldn't quite remember: my ownership stake in a family plot of land, the very land that, ironically, had been rented for the wedding reception. At that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation he'd been carrying began to transform into strength. It was as if life had hidden there, inside that trunk, the answer I needed. I realized that revenge didn't have to be carried out with shouts, but could be silent, firm, and above all, dignified. Because dignity isn't asked for, it's shown. This made me think about how we all have our memory chests. Some hold only memories, but others hide valuable resources. It could be a forgotten talent, an old friendship, or even a skill you never took seriously. How often do people complain of betrayal or humiliation without realizing that within themselves lie weapons of liberation? At that moment, I felt a mixture of emotion and serenity. It wasn't about money, but about respect. Fate had placed before me a rare opportunity to show my son that education and family can't be discarded like an old dress. Life always finds a curious way of giving us back what they tried to take away. It's like the story of the gardener who, after being unfairly fired, began selling seedlings on the sidewalk. Years later, he had a successful flower shop, while the company that humiliated him had gone bankrupt. His revenge wasn't revenge, it was liberation. And that's what I felt when I held those papers, a chance to write my own justice. I closed the trunk slowly, but I didn't close the chapter. I knew those documents were more than just stamped pages. They were the key to turning the tide. The marriage, which had seemed out of my reach, suddenly depended on me, and it was precisely at that point that the unexpected happened. On the eve of the wedding, just as I was preparing to face that day in silence, I received an official letter. It was a summons from the court, demanding my presence. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, but I soon realized, without the signature of the land's true owner, no contract would be valid. Suddenly, the entire lavish ceremony depended on me, the mother who had been rejected. I felt a profound irony in this. David and Emily had humiliated me, taking away my right to be present, but life itself was leading them back to my door. Not because I wanted revenge at any cost, but because justice sometimes has a silent way of teaching. It was as if fate had decided to remind me that dignity cannot be erased with bitter words. At that moment, I understood that the betrayal I suffered could be transformed into a lesson. Often, it takes pain knocking on others' doors for them to recognize the value they tried to diminish. This is a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the power life has to restore respect to those who have been humiliated. Justice may take time, but it always arrives. I stopped to reflect. How many people remain silent in the face of injustice in their families, believing they have no voice? The truth is, we always have some recourse, even when there seems to be no way out. It could be a law, a document, a memory, or even an unexpected ally. Life, in its complexity, always opens up opportunities for the liberation of those who are true to their principles. I remember a friend who was unfairly disinherited by her father, simply because she chose a different path. Years later, justice itself returned to her part of what was rightfully hers. It wasn't wealth that moved her, but the emotion of regaining her lost dignity. And that day, I realized my story followed the same path. As I held that summons, I felt a strange calm. It was like I was about to watch a play where I wasn't just a spectator, but a central figure in the plot. The wedding, which was supposed to be the pinnacle of their happiness, was now on hold until I decided to attend, a twist worthy of the best real-life plots. And so, with a firm heart, I realized that the next day wouldn't just be a celebration. It would be a silent trial of family relationships, a moment when politeness and respect would be put to the test. And there, in front of everyone, I would hold in my hands the pen capable of changing the course of history. I entered the courtroom with slow but steady steps. The atmosphere was almost palpable, and all eyes were on me. David avoided meeting my eyes, and Emily, sitting next to him, kept her head down. It was as if the humiliation inflicted on me was returning twice over, not through my voice, but through the silent force of the situation. The judge, with a stern expression, began the session and got straight to the point. You are the true owner of the land. Do you or do you not authorize the wedding to take place here? At that moment, silence fell over the room. It was as if time had stopped, awaiting the answer that could change everything. David, who had previously rejected me, now leaned forward, trying to mask his anger with a desperate plea. "Mom, please don't complicate things," he said, his voice thick with tension. The emotion of seeing him plead was intense, not out of revenge, but because he finally understood. That respect is not negotiable. Emily, for her part, barely looked up. The arrogance I'd recognized in her seemed to have dissolved before that scene. It was as if life had given her an unexpected lesson in manners and family relationships. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just a contract, but something much bigger. I thought about how so many people go through similar situations. Parents humiliated by their children, professionals ignored by their own colleagues. Life, however, always presents moments of reversal where dignity presents itself in all its strength. The courtroom had become the stage for my liberation. I grabbed the pen that was on the table. I felt its weight, not just physical, but symbolic. That object represented power, choice, consequence, and everyone was paying attention to the movement of my hand. I knew that any decision written there would echo for a long time within that family. I looked at David one last time. He, embarrassed, couldn't hold my gaze. I took a deep breath, ready to take the next step. And it was in that moment that I understood. The greatest revenge isn't in screaming, but in the serenity of those who know their worth. And my answer was yet to come. I took a deep breath before signing the papers. The entire room seemed suspended in midair, as if everyone was awaiting an unlikely outcome. Calmly, I slid the pen over the document, but didn't hand it over immediately. I held it in my hands and, for the first time, raised my voice calmly. There, not just a wounded mother spoke, but a woman aware of the value she carries. I looked David in the eye and said, "You can deny me a seat at the party, but you will never take away the respect I deserve as a mother." Those words weren't spoken with vengeance, but as an eternal reminder. The entire courtroom remained silent. Even the judge nodded, confirming the force of what had just been stated. David lowered his head, unable to hold her gaze. The emotion I felt in that moment wasn't one of triumph, but of liberation. The betrayal that had hurt so much had become a lesson he would never forget. Emily, for her part, looked stunned. For the first time, she realized she had misjudged this woman who had never stopped fighting for her family. The judge then confirmed the wedding could go ahead, but he made it clear that the moment would be remembered not just for the ceremony, but for the dignity that had been imposed there. A magistrate's words echoed louder than any applause. It was as if justice had risen to my defense without me even having to ask. I learned that true revenge is silent, marked by actions that reveal character. There's no need to raise your voice when life already speaks for you. And in that courtroom, I not only regained my place, but reaffirmed that education and respect are legacies that cannot be negotiated. This episode taught me that no one can take away our dignity unless we give it freely. Humiliation, when faced with determination, can be transformed into strength. It's a lesson that applies not only to family relationships, but to any area of life. I left the courthouse with light steps, as if leaving behind not a weight, but a mark. And although the wedding had gone ahead, everyone knew that the true protagonist of the story was not the bride or the groom, but the mother who refused to accept oblivion. And now I ask you, how many times have you been cast aside within your own family? How many times have betrayal and humiliation come from the very people you helped most? The truth is harsh, but liberating. No one can erase your dignity if you don't allow it. Respect isn't begged for. It's earned and reaffirmed every day through actions. Think about it. In what area of your life have you been accepting less than you deserve? At work, in your family relationships, in your friendships. Perhaps it's time to open your own chest of memories, revisit your forgotten strengths, and use them as your silent weapon of liberation. What if you had the chance today to show, without shouting, that you deserve respect? What would you do? Would you let it pass you by? Or would you use this opportunity to rewrite your story? I want you to reflect deeply on this. And if this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Do you believe that justice always arrives in its own time? Your opinion may inspire others who also go through moments of pain and silence. And remember, each video here is more than a story. It's an invitation for you to see your own journey differently. So, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any powerful lessons that can transform your life and your family relationships.